Welcome, Dr. Morenike Giwa Onaiwu, founder of Advocacy Without Borders. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And I really want to begin quite, I hope, easily and ask you to give us a little background about the work that you do.
Sure. So my work is somewhat eclectic. I consider myself a scholar activist, and I do a lot of work related to disability justice, racial and gender justice, a lot of intersectional work. So some of it is, traditional scholarly work, but I do a lot of advocacy, as well as writing, and a lot of digital media and partnerships. It's really important work for our communities to be able to, who are living at the intersections of all of these different identities, to be able to be involved in these different fields and these different spaces. And so I try to, when I can, provide the perspective of myself and my colleagues as much as possible.
Would you talk a little bit about the importance of educating around autism and neurodivergence?
Yes. And so it's interesting because, I think when something starts to come out of obscurity, people start getting a little frustrated by it seems like society, because we have always been here. There have always been autistic people. There has always been neurodivergence. And I think the importance is to understand it so that we can have more acceptance. Awareness is fine, but you need to kind of build and grow from that to acceptance and to, hopefully like emancipation and liberation. Mm-hmm. So essentially the concept of neurodiversity is such just that it's the reality of life is that we have neurological biodiversity, as coined by Judy Singer, that all the brains, that humans have are different, just like our fingerprints are different, just like our DNA is. It's the same concept, and that's what makes our world work. Some brains diverge more from the typical way of processing, thinking, et cetera, and are more neural minorities. Autism is one of those. ADHD can be another, dyslexia, dyscalculia, giftedness. And so neurodivergent is a concept that was coined by a queer autistic person of color, Kasiana Sasamasu, to be inclusive of those differences, as well as acquired neurological differences that a person might have throughout life.
Would you share some common misconceptions around autism and neurodivergence?
Yes. So some of the common misconceptions are that it is a child thing for children. And, whether it's ADHD, autism, we grow up. Most humans spend more of their time as an adult than they do as children. It isn't something that only exists in children. It might be evident in a particular way in children, but it is something that is lifelong. It is pervasive. Another misconception I think that people have, specifically related to autism, is that we have no empathy, we have no emotions, we're like cold, or we're over the top. And I think neither of those is actually true. We do have empathy. I think a lot of the research has been misinterpreted. It states that we may not, the research may say, that we're deficient in empathy, but they're only talking about the cognitive empathy in terms of being able to literally put yourself in the person's shoes. In terms of effective empathy, we actually score higher than others. Mm-hmm. There's misconceptions about our, our ability to, our understanding, our communication. There's also misconceptions about, whether or not it appears in certain groups. Like there used to be a thought that was just, a white thing or a little boy thing, hence Lighted Up Blue for so many years. Mm-hmm. All of these things are incorrect. Like there's a lot of neurodivergence in this world. Is it the majority? No, but chances are someone has that. You have that uncle that kind of is always in the back room. You only see on Thanksgiving, or you've got that kind of that cousin that everybody kind of, or that person that was in your neighborhood that everybody kind of had to look out for because they were just kind of look a little different. Or people could be, camouflaging and masking themselves to where you may not see neurodivergence. What you might see are other, manifestations of living in a world that's not built for us.
Mm-hmm. You've done work around a couple different communities, and I wonder, first, would you talk about neurodivergence in BIPOC communities and the work that you've done around that?
Sure. One of the things that I do that I hope is very important is to try to address the intersection of like race, culture, and disability, or specifically, neurodivergence, autism, ADHD, et cetera, as well as the larger intellectual developmental disability, spectrum, because a lot of the time people will do not understand what is neurodivergence in one of us. It is perceived differently. What in another person, in a person who is, is a white person, may be perceived as manifestations, characteristics of a disability. For us, it's seen as aggression, or it's seen as defiance, or it's seen as something, other than what it is. We are often there, there's a concept about the adultification of children of color, about how we're seen as older than what we are, and therefore possibly more threatening. And so a lot of our traits, are missed. And similarly, because there are sometimes things within our cultures or our communities that make concession for, or they might even celebrate some aspects of being neurodivergent, it might not be something that's realized as, anything that you need to get, seek, treatment or medical attention for, and therefore, you are dismissed. Similarly, there's also the concept of medical racism and, subconscious bias. It does exist. We have a lot of research data that shows that even when you control for marital status, for educational attainment, for income, for a number of things, that it is still far less likely that a white provider will refer a child of color to have further screening, despite the parent bringing up concerns. It happens a lot later, 15 to 30 months in some cases. The recent CDC data is the very first time in many years that we've finally seen an increase among Black and brown children, but we know that we're still underdiagnosed.
You also did work with women and non-binary folks, and would you touch on how that shows up?
Yes, absolutely. And that's something that's very important to me and myself as someone who identifies as a non-binary woman and as pan. Our community is, one that's fairly gender diverse. And so I think that because diagnostic criteria were initially developed primarily with little boys, not only did it not successfely capture people who were diagnosed later, like in later childhood or adolescence or adulthood, but it also didn't, make concessions for the way it might be perceived differently according to gender. Like, so someone who's assigned female at birth, the socialization is different. The person might mimic their peers a little differently, or their, special interests or whatever differences that they might have might be, more easily understood or accepted than someone else. And so we often internalize a lot of things and can be missed. And it's especially concerning now that when we look at some of the legislation, like what just happened in Missouri and other things regarding people trying to have, block access by saying that you have to have these psychological evaluations before you can get gender affirming care. That's also very concerning because neurodivergence and gender diversity or sexuality, all those things can exist in the same person, and they very much do. A lot of data shows a higher likelihood in our community. So it's a concern that that us embracing or understanding who we are is viewed as in a pathological manner. And we're small but mighty. These are things that aren't just hashtags to us. They're impacting the people that we know, the people that we love. They're causing people to move or to have fear for their lives and their livelihood. And so it's something that we're trying to make sure that whether it's individually or in cross disability, cross movement advocacy, that we're trying to make sure that we advocate heavily to try to change the tide from being turned backward.